You're listening to part 3 of a 4-part series of a couple of 70-year-old men who have been friends for life. Jimmy Childre and I are enjoying all the memories, but we also are memorializing these stories for those who come after us. As we both have said, we grew up in the right place at the right time, a time that could be forgotten if people like us don't share their stories. In this episode, we'll begin by talking about each of the teachers during our first 8 years of school, their impact on our lives, and the many fun hours we spent on the Reynolds golf course. We will also move into our high school years, high school speech class that changed the course of our lives, and our first double date to a major concert. We will also confess to a few shenanigans and escapades never made public before. And finally, we will get into the story of the Childre family's car business. This is Bruce Goddard, and you're listening to the View from a Hearse podcast.
Viewing life from a hearse, it could be worse. Laugh, think, and cry with the country undertaker.
We're about to talk about our teachers, but before we do that, we had mentioned, Jimmy, your cousin Mary Jo in our band, the Discords, playing at her birthday party, and it dawned on me that we missed mentioning and talking about her daddy and Goodrow Appliance Store. That was a mainstay in Reynolds. Goodrow Appliance Company is still going strong now. So, Jimmy, talk about your thoughts about Goodrow. We should have talked about that earlier.
So the Goodrow Appliance Store, it was located between Altman's and Braswell's, so where we were talking. Braswell's where my grandmother Childre worked. And so we spent a lot of time going up and down that street. And Joe Goodrow sold appliances, but he also sold bicycles. I'll never forget when my grandfather bought me a bicycle from that store, Swin bicycle. It was red with white lettering, and Swin was being advertised a lot on television. We saw it, and I thought it was the nicest thing I'd ever seen in my life. So Mary Jo, my cousin, our classmate, parents, Joe and Josephine, had Goodrow Appliance Store. Now, Josephine, Mary Jo's mother, is my mother's first cousin. Josephine's mother and my granddaddy were brothers and sisters, and another sister was my Aunt Mary Hallie. And here's what's interesting. Uncle Lester and Aunt Mary had the store before Joe and Josephine did. They had that store, and I think Aunt Mary had a women's shop, a dress shop in the back of what we know now as Goodrow Appliance Store. So Uncle Lester sold the appliances out of the front, and Aunt Mary sold dresses and maybe even china out of the back of that store.
We were talking about our church connection. There's also a connection with this family and some of the stuff they did in the church as far as gave to the church and contributed to the church. The chimes at the Methodist church that still go off today, wasn't that part of their donation to the church?
The chimes were given by my granddaddy, Bob Swearingen. I think what you're thinking about is Aunt Mary gave the cross that's above the sanctuary in memory of Uncle Lester.
You're talking about your granddaddy. We talked about him earlier. He was the guy I bought my first car from. He was a car dealer, but also he was in the cattle business all over this country. And I remember as a kid, a very famous movie star coming in to buy cattle from him. Just mention that.
That's right. So granddaddy had Swearingen Hereford farms, Polled Herefords, and was one of the larger producers in the whole country. He was actually president of the American Polled Hereford Association. I can remember when we were little, he and my grandmother traveling to Ireland when he was president of the association to promote the breed, the Polled Hereford breed. He had people buying cattle from him all over the country. I remember it was a big thing to us. The movie stars, Susan Haywood, Academy Award winner, came to Reynolds to buy some cattle from my grandfather. Remember her having lunch at my grandparents' house, and that was a big, big deal to us, that there was a real movie star.
She was on the big screen. That'd be like Julia Roberts today or somebody coming in.
That's right. She was nominated for Academy Award Best Actress about 5 times and won it once, I think. And there were big sales out there, and people would come from all over the country. It reminds me of something else. Do you remember at the car dealerships where once a year was the only time that the manufacturers showed the new cars?
Oh, yeah.
It was in September of every year, and that continued on for decades.
It was a big surprise. They were completely hidden, but we had a little secret. Yeah, that's right.
You tell the secret.
Well, the secret was that your granddaddy owned that store, and he would park those brand new next model year Chevrolets out in his backyard, hidden from the public. You would sneak us, few of our friends would go back there and check out those vehicles out ahead of time. We had a sneak preview of the new cars. I forgot all about that. That's pretty cool.
We surely did. I'd make sure. Yeah, I always wanted to show them to you and our other friends. So we'd go out there and show them, and then the show day, as we called it, and there'd be an evening unveiling, and we'd have Cokes and hot dogs, and people from town would come to see the new cars. That was an annual event.
No, they don't do that now, but it was a big deal to keep the new car secret, wasn't it?
That's exactly, because every car changed, almost every model changed every single year.
Let's move on, and we're going to talk about our teachers, these incredible ladies that had such a major impact on our life. You mentioned Miss Verner, and we talked about, Dr. Fountain being her son and how she was adored by everybody, our first grade teacher, but there were other teachers. Let's just talk about the teachers that we talked about them being parents of our friends or grandparents of our friends. Let's just talk through that list of people.
Well, Bruce, the memories I have, first of all, is I think of all of them as being excellent teachers and very good people. Now, they were pretty stern with us too.
Yep.
They were embracing and loved us and taught us, but they also were interested in teaching us how to behave and what was right and what was wrong. And they didn't mind telling our parents if we'd been out of line. Matter of fact, I remember one time with Miss Payne, who I was related to. She was married to my dad's first cousin, Henry Payne, and their sons were our age, and we grew up with them. But I remember one time I had passed a note that I shouldn't have passed in study hall to our friend Chuck, and Miss Payne caught it. She saw it. She said, "Chuck, bring that to me." And he took it to her. I kept begging. I said, "Chuck, don't do it. Don't give it to her. Don't give it to her." Because what I'd written it was not anything I was proud for. I would want her to see.
I'm sure.
And you remember how Miss Payne wore glasses? She wore reading glasses.
Yep.
And they were on lower down, and she'd look above those glasses at us. She read a couple of sentences and looked over those glasses at me, and she finished it up and looked over those glasses at me. She said, "Jimmy, I'll see you after class." And I was scared to death. And I begged. So she said, "Now, first thing I'm going to do is call your daddy tonight." I said, "Miss Payne, please." I begged her not to call my dad. And I don't think she ever did, because I never heard from him on it. I never brought it up to her again, and I never heard from her.
Speaking of your dad, we're going to have him on here. So, folks, you just keep listening to this. Stay on. We're going to have Mr. Jimmy Childre Sr. on here to talk about his memories of Reynolds and a little bit of what he accomplished. You've been listening to what his son accomplished, but we're talking to him too. Jimmy, I remember our second grade teacher, Miss Hollis, and you're talking about Miss Verner was as sweet as she could be, and so was Miss Hollis, but you're talking about the sternness. You remember the saying she would tell somebody if they talked out of turn or whatever, they did something wrong?
Absolutely. Yes, I remember.
She'd say, "You're sorry as gully dirt."
That was her expression.
She'd bring her sister, who we called Honey Watley, Don Watley's mother, and she would come in there and play the piano. And in her second grade class, we were learning how to play the rings or whatever, the triangles that we did, and they were teaching us about music in the second grade. You remember that in the classroom?
Yes, sir. They were great teachers.
And then Mama Bird, Miss Bird, was our third grade teacher. And the thing I remember about her, back then teachers could discipline you. They didn't always send you to the office. They liable to get a paddle and spank you right there in the classroom.
They would do it.
Yeah.
Yes, sir, they do it.
But Miss Bird didn't. She would shake you. She would grab you by the shoulders and shake you a little bit to get your attention. You remember that? She was.
Yeah.
if there's ever been an angel on earth, she was it. She was the most godly, sweetest woman I've ever known in my life. And I'll never forget when she was very old and ill, and she had gotten blind, but somebody stole a tree that she had just had planted. Maybe a special tree. I can't remember what it was. And they hated to tell her, but somebody had to go in and tell her, Mama Bird, somebody stole your tree. And her immediate response was, I hope they will enjoy it as much as I have. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
And then Miss Susie Woods, who you talked about, when we were in her class when we got word that Kennedy had died, she was
in the fourth grade.
She would sip on a cough syrup. You remember that? So she'd have it in the drawer. We didn't know what that was, but she had a cough, but she was always sipping on it. But she would have rules, and she wrote them on the board first day of class. And I don't know what all of them were, but one of them was, you cannot say shut up. You remember that? And number 2, you cannot say the Lord's name in vain. And there was a couple more. I don't know what they were. But those rules, if somebody in there said shut up, you talking about Doodle, Douglas Williams, he'd be over there, Lord's name in vain, Lord's name in vain. He said shut up. He'd be pointing you out over there.
Bruce, I remember one day we brought up Stevie Altman earlier. We brought up Chuck earlier, and we talked about Chuck's Mama Bird's, his grandmother, in the 3rd grade. So we were in the 4th grade, and Chuck and Stevie and I were talking during class. We must have been seated next to each other. We kept talking, and she turned around and told us to quiet down, and we kept talking. So she turned around again and said, Jimmy, Chuck, Stevie, I told y'all to stop talking. And then when she turned back toward the board, I heard her mumble. She said, y'all are cousins and you don't even know it. And I got older. I've always remembered that and wondered what she meant by it. So when I've gotten older and we're doing a lot of family trees and stuff, I see just how related we are. Yeah, and she's our cousin too. So I was related to Miss Verna through her marriage, Miss Susie through our great-great-grandparents, and that makes me related to Chuck and Stevie.
Yep.
Miss Payne through the marriage that I talked about earlier. I was related to 4 or 5 of these teachers and didn't really realize it. Didn't realize it at the time.
And you know what that meant? You better be very careful how you dated, because you didn't want to have children with some of these people that you didn't realize was your cousin. you get it mixed up in a hurry in there, right?
I don't think we ever had much risk in that. But
when you talk about Miss Susie, she was one sweet lady, and she was teaching us principles about how to live. And, I've always, the rest of my life, although I've said it many times, obviously, telling somebody to shut up, I always thought that was inappropriate because of what Miss Susie said. I always thought it was inappropriate to say the Lord's name in vain. You lived in Sandersville for a year, and Miss Fuller was our 5th grade teacher, and she was a little bit intimidating. She came with a reputation, and she was more stern, and she was tough. And I'll never forget, Jimmy, she gave me a test, gave all of us a test, and I did not study for it. And she gave the grades out. I made a 15 on that test. And I remember she wrote on that test, Bruce, I am very disappointed in you, Miss Fuller. And that broke my heart. And so what was funny, she was tough, but after that, I busted my butt for her because I didn't want her to be disappointed in me. And then, later in life, I came back home. I felt like she was as proud of me as my parents were proud of me. Even just when I was running the funeral homes and making a living and living in town, she beamed almost every time she saw me because, and I think about that note she wrote me that she was disappointed, but now she was proud. Her daughter, Bunny, and she's married to Mark Harris. They're like very good friends. Bunny was in our class. You remember her along with Sandra Arnold, ended up to be amazing basketball players.
So Daddy had opened the dealership in Sandersville in 1964, and my first year of school here was the 5th grade. And I had a teacher named Miss Spivey. And she and I got along well, but she had to discipline me some too from talking too much and doing other things that little kids do. But she and I became friends as adults. She was a good customer of mine at the dealership, and I was a pallbearer in her funeral. And I used to go sit with her at home and visit with her.
Those relationships in a little town, I think most people, they go to school and you can't even hardly name your teachers, and certainly you don't ever see them again. But we ended up having relationships with these people as adults. I remember my mother, one of her ministries when she would go pick up the little ladies in town to take them to get the mail every day, to take them to the drugstore where they'd hang out and drink coffee, you take them to the grocery store, to whatever they did. I mean, Miss Hollis was in that group. Miss Susie was in that group. There was other ladies that she would pick up. She did it every day, I guess, or 3 or 4 days a week. She'd just go pick these people up. So I'd see them, and I'd see them with my mother. And it goes back to what we were just talking about, the closeness of that community and how it all ties in together. Our 6th grade teacher, that's when we started changing classes, whatever they call that, Miss Ruth Jones.
Miss Ruth Jones, who taught us sciences in the junior high school, and Miss Mildred Payne, who taught us math. They both were neighbors of my grandmother's, my grandmother Emmeline, Nenny Line. Now, here's something ironic. Nenny Line never learned to drive a car. She didn't have an interest in it. Maybe she tried when she was young. So her sons, all 3, were Chevrolet dealers, had car dealerships, but she didn't have a car. I remember Daddy sending the car over there to keep in the driveway after Granddaddy died, because she was relying on someone else to drive her. If we got a little older, we drove her. But Mrs. Ruth Jones and Miss Mildred Payne often picked her up on their way to town and took her to work. When they would go to school to teach, they would take her to Braswell's store that we were talking about earlier. And then they'd pick her up in the afternoons and go back.
I want to come back in a minute, and I want you to talk about the dealerships, because I think that's an important part of this story. Miss Ruth Jones, her husband, Roy Jones, and my daddy were best friends their entire lives. They went hunting together. They traveled together. They fished together. They grew up together. And that was definitely somebody that I know if I got in trouble in her class, it'd get back to them quickly. But I don't think it bothered me much. And I don't know if this happened in the 7th grade. You were not there in the 6th, so I'm not sure if I did in 7th grade. But one time I was hiding under her desk. It was at lunch break, and I hid under her desk, and she came in and was, getting ready to teach and sat down at the desk, and I came up out of there and scared her slap to death. So one, I didn't get thrown out. Mom and Daddy found out about that in a hurry, I can tell you that. And another time I remember that Daddy wrote her a note and said, "Ruth, please excuse Bruce from science today. They are doing an autopsy at the funeral home today, and he will be over here, and I'm sure he will learn more here than he will learn in the science class today." That was the note, and she's okay. So I went across the street and watched somebody have an autopsy. Can you believe that?
Yeah, that's the way life was. That's the way we did things then.
Then Miss Betty Watley was a 7th grade teacher, and of course she taught us English when we were changing classes during our junior high. I can still quote the poems that we had to learn in her class, and I'm sure you can. "In Flanders fields the poppies blow, between the crosses, row on row that mark our place." You remember that? You remember all what we learned?
I remember us having to memorize those.
Oh yeah.
My mom had her as a teacher, and Mama still knows the poems that she memorized.
Yeah.
And Bruce, I've heard you recite the poem "If" at the end of your speeches many times. And I can recite that one right now.
Yeah, that was one of them we learned. And there's another thing we did, because I remember the first day of school, when I first went in her class, desk was on the row close to the window, and I'm kind of leaning on the window. And she starts off, "Lean thine arms upon the window sills of heaven." I jumped up. I thought she was getting on to me for leaning my arms on the windowsill, and I realized she was about to teach us another poem, or teach us a poem, probably the first one she taught. But what you would do, if you remember, they would call you up front. You had to recite that poem, and if you were lucky, if you were at the end of the class, you could listen to 15 people recite it before you. You could learn it by listening to them say it. You remember?
I do remember.
Everybody had to stand up. It was a lot of poems. I think we learned some Shakespeare in there. "Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ear. We've come to bury Caesar, not to praise him. The evil that do lives after them. The good is often interred within the bones. So let it be with Caesar." I can say all that. What she taught us in that class. It's unbelievable.
She taught us that, yeah. And the poem "If" that you recite so many times, it starts off, "If you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you."
Yep. If you can trust yourself when all men doubt you and make allowance for their doubting too. That's some powerful stuff, buddy.
It's a powerful, powerful point. Yeah.
Unbelievable where we grew up and what we got to experience. Wow.
I agree.
The other thing, you talk about the baseball, but the other thing that we did, that we spent a lot of time on that golf course out there and playing golf. There were two forms of entertainment. We weren't playing baseball. We were on the golf course, and our mama would drop us off out there, and we'd be out there all day long. You worked out there many summers. And just talk about our time out there. How many rounds of golf did we play out there, do you guess?
Bruce, I can't even there's be no way to calculate it. You and I started playing out there young, and then later, maybe starting in the 7th grade, I talked my granddaddy and my dad and let me go out there some and work in the summers out there because I wanted to be around the golf course. And I always was in hopes that I could get off a little early on particular long summer days and to get to play a few rounds. And oftentimes you would be working at y'all's grocery store, and you and your daddy would come out, and maybe Mac would be oftentimes with you, or George. If I could get finished on the course in time, y'all would ask me to join you. And I would, always looking forward to it. And we played so many rounds of golf together on that golf course. And then other days, you and I were on the golf team together at Fort Valley High School. You and I would play many rounds together. And Bruce, there'd be no way to count the number of rounds you and I walked over and over around that 9-hole golf course.
And had every conversation about everything you can possibly have a conversation about. And it wasn't about golf. It was about life, exactly. About girls, about whatever age we were becoming and all the stuff we were dealing with. How many conversations did we have? And at some point we were riding in golf carts too that didn't have brakes on them sometimes, but we spent a lot of time. You're talking about playing golf with my parents, with my dad and all that. But Daddy played golf every Thursday afternoon. The store would close, and he would take off to the golf course. And then during the summer months, we played almost every afternoon when the store closed at 6 p.m. We'd all go to the golf course and at least get in 9 holes, and according to how many he's playing, get in 18. But we played almost every afternoon. But I remember one day vividly, we were playing on Thursday afternoon, and I don't know who all was playing, but I know Mac was in the group, and you were standing there, and Mac ran back to take a practice swing, hit you in the head with the golf club.
It was on the first tee. We were about to tee off, and Mac, it was your daddy. Yeah, that made 4. So y'all asked me to play with you, and that made the foursome. It was your daddy, Mac, and you and me. And Mac was taking a practice swing, and I was standing to his left, right beside him. And on his backswing, his golf club went over my head and hit me on the left side of my head, his driver did.
I was standing there right. It sounded like something hit a tree. I was standing
It did. It just about knocked me out. And I almost said the first cuss word I would have ever said in front of adults.
You probably did. But you just forgot it.
Yeah, maybe for a moment I was out. But I was hoping that I didn't say what came to my mind that I was about to come out of my mouth. Oh. Yeah, I remember that. I remember that very well.
As we got older, we were teenagers, and then we playing golf. We'd carry on foolishness out there. I'll never forget one day, just me and you were playing, and no telling how many times we were going around. But we'd mess with some of the older players. And I remember one time, I think you were with me, we were putting on number 2, which is pretty short, par 4. And the guys that were playing behind us, we know they were gambling. They were playing, not big money, obviously, but they were serious about the golf. And we were putting, and the ball came through the trap, went up on the green. And I think I took the ball and went over and threw it in the trap.
That's exactly what you did. That's exactly what I remember that vividly.
I can't imagine.
Yeah, you did that. And I was thinking, well, they shouldn't have hit into it. Well, I don't believe I'd have buried that ball in the same trap like you did.
Then we were still mad with them because
they
were playing behind us. And, of course, they didn't know that we'd put the ball in the trap because the ball was in the trap when he got there. He couldn't see it from the tee. He had a eagle putt, but he never knew it till he died, whoever it was. But we were putting on number 5. We could see them putting out on number 4. But before we went to number 5, I peed in the cup on number 4. And we stood, Jimmy was looking at me like, I know you didn't do that. We stood on number 5 green and watched them putt out and reach in there and get the ball and shake the ball. You remember that?
That's exactly what we did. I think they hit into us a second time, and that's when you had enough. Instead of putting the ball off the green or something, you decided you'd take care of them a different way.
Yeah, I put something down so it wouldn't drain in there, and I peed in the cup. And everybody had to shake that off, and I'm sure at some point I remember having a thought, and I think maybe you had the thought, said, Bruce, they might think that's water, but eventually they're going to realize that, hey, let's get the heck out of here. So we started playing real fast. By the time they got on number 6, we were coming down number 9. We were getting out of there so they wouldn't catch up with us.
That's right. Well, we stood on number 5 green and watched them putt on number 4 green, and saw how each one of them shaking the golf ball off when they took it out of the cup.
And you can't talk about the golf course and us playing golf. We got so many memories out there. Folks, I hope you enjoy listening to two old guys talk about their life. But Miss Sylvia mentioned the Crawley twins. They were out there too. They were out there just as much as we were. We all spent our lives. I can name other people that were involved. But the Crawley twins were some big old guys. And Chuck Bishop, our golf pro, got a new kind of golf ball called was it a Supro 300 or something? What was that thing, Jimmy? It's a new kind of golf ball that was solid. You remember that golf ball?
It was a solid ball that didn't have a core with windings and then the cover on top of it.
Yeah.
On top of that, it was a solid golf ball.
And it was advertised that this ball will go a lot further than other balls. So we went out on the first tee, and I think it was Will that hit it, but Will was a big old strong guy. And he hit that ball so hard, that ball went in 2 directions. He split that ball in half. You remember?
He surely did. Maybe it was called a Super Pro.
I think that's what
Something
I said,
like
Super Pro. Yeah, I think it was.
Super Pro.
Then you talked about the golf team. We started driving by then. I mean, it was kind of unusual that I want to talk about going to high school too, but we made the golf team as 9th graders at much bigger high school than we were used to going to at Fort Valley. So we were pretty good golfers, I guess. We taught ourselves. I didn't know I was peaking out at that age, but I did. But we were as good as any of them over there on the golf team, I guess, because we sure played on the golf team, right? We made the team to play on it.
We made the team. We were starters our first year.
Yeah, and we would clean our clubs the night before. That was a big deal. I mean, you remember getting together and cleaning the clubs. One of those nights is when the night you realized that you didn't ever want to be in the funeral business. And I think we were cleaning the clubs, and Daddy called.
Let me take it from here. Let me take the story, because I remember it very well too. There are a few things in life that are so vividly etched in my memory that I'll never forget them. So here's what I remember about that night. We had a golf match the next day. And you and I can't remember where it was, maybe Hawkinsville or somewhere. And we had been at the golf course practicing and playing. And we went to our house, and to clean our clubs. And your daddy called down there and asked if you were there. Again, this was that example of kids being everywhere. And the parents didn't really matter. You knew that Jimmy was probably with Bruce, and they'd be at one house or the other. And Mama answered and said, Mr. Ed's on the phone. And he talked to you and told us to come to the hospital. Am I right so far?
Yep.
And Bruce, I can't remember if we were driving and had a car. I think we were. If not, my mom would have taken us up there, which it wasn't far away.
If we went in a car, we went in mine, because at the end of the day, you didn't have a way to get home.
That's right. Yeah. Exactly. So if we went in your car there, the one you talked about you bought for my granddaddy.
Mm-hmm.
And we got there, and the hearse was parked in the alleyway next to the hospital side door. And we walked up to it, and there was a man there that had been run over. Now, I won't stop and let you tell the story about the accident, how it happened. Then I'll pick back up of what happened after we moved the body.
But even as whatever we were, 15 years old probably, when this happened, I'd grown up in this. I was used to this. There was nothing unusual about Daddy calling me to help him get somebody to pick somebody up out of the hearse. A man had been run over by a vehicle, and he was in bad shape. So Jimmy was caught up in that. So I helped Daddy get whatever we did to get him out of the hospital, because you took him into the hospital. Dr. Watley had to see him and all that stuff. He was obviously dead, but Jimmy was involved in something he didn't mean to get involved in. So Jimmy, I think Daddy asked us to follow him to the funeral home, and so
First of all, he told us, he identified the person that we were coming to help him with.
Right.
You and I both knew that gentleman.
Right.
He was a prominent man in Reynolds.
Right.
Who had been run over by a car that night at dusk.
I don't know if you ever saw his face at that point, but you could see that it was a rough sight to be looking at. So I was used to it, even at 15, but obviously I wasn't paying attention to Jimmy. I guess I just assumed everybody was used to that. But
I didn't need to see his face.
But we followed him. He said, I'm going to need some help to get him in the funeral home.
Well, I think we might have helped put him back in the hearse.
Yeah, I think so.
First step.
Yeah, that's right.
And then he said, boys, follow me to the funeral home. And I thought, boy, I thought to myself, this doesn't sound like it's going to turn out well for me. And so we did, parked behind the funeral home. And I had been in the funeral home several times with you. We'd walk in the front door and walk through it and go out the back door, taking a shortcut home from school, walking home from school. And you often wanted to walk through there. And I never liked the idea of walking through there, but I went along with you. But this time, this was different. So I knew where the rooms were positioned in there. And so we helped your daddy take the body on the stretcher up the stairs, the back stairs. And he said, boys, bring him on in here. And it was the embalming room. I knew it was the embalming room. You showed it to me once. And we'd walk by it many times, but I wouldn't ever look when we walked by it. So we helped him with that. I knew what was about to happen next. He said, okay, boys. And I knew what he was about to say. And I said, Mr. Ed, I think my mama's calling me. I got to go. And I remember leaving that back door and jumping from the top of the steps to the bottom, never touching a step. And I set a world's record running home from the funeral home to our house. And I remember thinking this, Bruce. I said, Bruce is going to do this the rest of his life because you were rolling up your sleeves and you were ready to help your daddy go forward with the embalming. And I said, I guarantee you this is what Bruce is going to do. And I also knew at the exact moment I could strike it off my list of potential occupations.
That you were not going to do, right?
I knew I wasn't going to do it. I didn't ever want to be around it again. Once was enough for me, and I wanted to have absolutely nothing to do with it.
You know, it's funny how certain instances like that you never forget. That's really true.
Oh, I'll never forget. I remember it, Bruce, like it was last night.
Yeah, that was one of those things.
By the way, I just want to add, I was right.
Yeah,
you did do it the rest of your life, yeah. And I'm no more comfortable going in there now than I was. Yeah, when we were 15.
And that's something. Another memory I have, which is a great one. We were talking about Reynolds School and growing up, and our friends' grandparents being our teachers, and parents and grandparents being our teachers, and grew up in that little community. And then the schools consolidated. And we ended up going to Fort Valley, which to us was a much bigger school. And it was a bigger school. So we, as ninth graders, you and I and several people from Reynolds, it was, I don't know how many in our class, but it was half of them probably, or a percentage of them, went to Fort Valley School. But you and I went over to start our career at Fort Valley High School at a new school. We went together. I think we probably rode a bus or something at the beginning to go over there. But I remember all these pretty girls and us being in all these people we didn't know. And I think it was the first day of school, they had this assembly where they brought everybody in the ninth grade in, and which was a lot of people to us. It was probably, 180 people or something, right?
Yeah, that sounds right.
In the ninth grade, it was probably 5 or 6 grades with 30 people each, I'm guessing. But way more than we were used to with 20 or 25 or whatever was in our class. But they had some elections, and we were nervous. What's your memories of that? You remember when we went in that first day in that assembly?
I do remember it. So we were sitting down there in the front of the ninth graders were sitting down on the right side of the auditorium in the very front. And you and I were almost either on the first or second row, somewhere down front. And we didn't know what they were going to do in there. I mean, we never had experienced anything like that. We were pretty nervous anyway, being in that big school. They let each class nominate their officers for the year. And I remember when the girls in our class, there were two things they nominated: the officers and the escort for the homecoming queen.
Right.
Yeah, I'll never forget. You and I both got nominated right there on the spot. We only knew the people from Reynolds in our class. We didn't hardly know anyone else in that class. So you take it from there and tell what you remember.
We didn't know what was going on, but I remember the funny thing I'll tell you in a minute, but you were elected president of the class, right?
Yeah, I'll never forget when this girl that I just met stood up and said, "I want to nominate Jimmy Childre for president of the class."
Yeah.
I looked at you and I thought, what in the world does that mean? Well, in a few minutes, we found out what it meant.
Well, you can go back to what your mama said in the previous episode. You could handle it. That's right. That's what Lee and Carter said about Jimmy. He's running for president. He can do it. I have no doubt. Yeah, that was funny. And then
you were nominated right behind me, right behind it.
I was laughing at you. You got elected, you nominated, and they voted on you. You got to be the president of the class. And I think, did you have to leave when they voted, or you remember that? Or did you just vote?
I don't remember that, Bruce. I don't remember how that worked.
Well, I was laughing.
But it happened quickly. Yeah, you were laughing.
And then all of a sudden, somebody nominated me for was it the escort for homecoming, right?
Something, yeah, escort for something. It was a big deal. Whoever got that role. Next thing I know, you were nominated and elected for that.
And I remember us laughing coming home, and we told our mamas, Jimmy got elected president of the class, and I got elected to be the homecoming escort, whatever that is. We didn't know what either one was going to be. But the funny thing to me was the next week in the Taylor County News, it came out in the little article in there that Jimmy Childre was elected president of the freshman class, and Bruce was elected to be the homecoming escort. Our mamas got that and went and took it to the Taylor County News and put it in the paper.
And we still didn't know exactly what it meant.
That was a great time meeting so many more, all the close friends we had in Reynolds and the girls. Then we had all these other cute girls and being around them. And we were in hog heaven over there, wasn't we?
Yes, sir. It was such a different experience leaving Reynolds 8th grade, graduating from the 8th grade in Reynolds because we no longer had a high school, and getting on that bus the first day and riding to high school with the older kids that were already going over there.
Yeah, and then when we got old enough to drive, we drove over there, and you and I talked about that. The road is different now. It was a narrow road through the swamp, and it was nothing unusual to us to be driving 90 miles an hour through that swamp. It's a miracle that we lived through all that. I mean, we wasn't doing anything crazy, but driving fast because we were running late or whatever. We had to get there or not be counted tardy, right?
Yeah, unless we decided to play hooky that day and not even go.
And that's a story that's worth telling. We were older now. We were seniors, I guess, and we had a college day, and we were going to leave the next day. I think we were going to take Friday off because we had a senior day, and we were going to go to Athens to the University of Georgia to take our college day. So on the way to school on Thursday, we decided, let's skip school today. And so we skipped school, and then we got caught. You remember?
Oh, yeah. We got called to the office the next day on Monday morning. We thought we'd gotten away with it.
Yeah. Somebody saw us.
We were sitting in homeroom on Monday morning, and the loudspeaker came over. It was Mr. McClendon, the principal, I think, that came over and said, Bruce Scott and Jimmy Childre, come to the office, please. Bruce Scott and Jimmy Childre, come to the office. I thought I don't think we were in the same homeroom class, but I met you in the hallway on the way.
I guarantee.
Bruce, I don't think this is going to turn out too good.
I couldn't believe it. I forgot how they caught us, but somebody saw us and
somebody turned us in.
Yeah, that was crazy. That was a heck of a time. The other thing I remember, Jimmy, and that's probably our first double date. If it wasn't, it was close to it. But when we got old enough to drive, you had a date and I had a date, and I remember going to see the Three Dog Night in concert. You remember doing that in Macon?
Absolutely. That was a big deal. We went to the Macon Coliseum with our dates to see what was a big-time band.
Yep.
That was a big, big deal to us.
When you think about it, we had these little TVs that they'd gotten a little better by then, but nothing like they are now. Record players. You couldn't have ear pods where you listen to music. To hear the voices of those guys in that band live, that was the first concert I'd ever been to. I was blown completely away. I'd never heard anything like it. It was unbelievable. You remember that?
Absolutely. I don't know what was more impressive to us, probably hearing the band, but it was also a big deal that we had our first real dates.
Oh, yeah.
And we were double dating. That was a big deal, too.
I tell you right now, what I remember is we treated those girls like they were queens. I promise you that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
We took them home. When they were supposed to be home, we didn't do it. Wasn't no frolicking and crazy stuff going on. I can name them. I don't guess it matter, but I can name the girls, but it was just a different time. Those girls' parents didn't have to worry whether we were going to take care of them or not. We've been trained to do that, hadn't we?
Yes, sir, we have. And to take them to a place and experience what we experienced, a big-time band like that. We had AM and FM radios to listen to, and the radio stations played all the top 40 songs all the time. And we knew the songs that the band was going to sing, but we also had 8-track players in our cars.
Right.
Tape players, and we knew the songs. And this, like you said, this was the first time we'd ever seen a big time band. They were higher up the musical order than the Discords were.
A lot. I just remember how good they were and the voices, and this. I thought, my gosh, that's unbelievable. That's unbelievable.
Well, I remember we thought they sound even better than they do on the radio. I remember us saying that.
Folks, you listen to two old guys that's been friends for 70 years talk about growing up. We're getting old, talking about life and how we remember it. And whatever we did it together most all our lives, I can tell you that. Both turned out to do stuff that we never expected to do, and some of it the least we ever expected to do. But one of the classes that we had together at Fort Valley High School was a speech class from a lady named Miss Harrelson. Tell me what you remember about her and us being in that class and what we went through having to give speeches. Just talk about that a minute.
We had part of her English class was called speech. She taught us formal speaking. We had to learn the principal parts of speech and the different types of speeches, and at different points during the year give those different types of speeches. And quite honestly, you and I didn't like it at all.
Oh, no.
I think it'd be safe to say that it was our least favorite course of anything we had.
You had a certain kind of speech you had to give. I was nervous. It wasn't but 20 people in the class, but I couldn't stand it.
20 people that you knew well on top of that.
Right.
But I remember the summers, Bruce, so we had this with her each year. And in the summer, she would write you and me both letters to invite us to join the debate team. I'll never forget the first year that I had a piece of mail, and that was unusual. And I had a letter from Miss Harrison. I thought, what in the world could that be for? And she was inviting me to join her debate team for the next year. And you got the same letter, and we talked about it. And I don't think we even considered it for a moment, did we? I think we just knew absolutely we weren't going to be a part of having to do that, especially if it meant putting in more work at school than was required. But if we were going to put in more work, it surely wasn't going to be for a debate team to learn how to make speeches.
Oh, I hate it with a passion. And if anybody would have said, you're going to have to give a speech sometime in your life, I'd have thought you have lost your mind. I dreaded it. I dreaded having to do it. I dreaded having to get ready for it. I struggled through it. You did the same. We had enough sense to get by, and we made good grades. We wasn't idiots, and we did it and made her, I guess she saw something in us probably to invite us to come on the debate team or whatever we were doing. But we certainly didn't see anything in us. But what was unique, and we've never been able to thank this lady, we can't find her. We've talked about Miss Harrelson. She would be totally surprised at how many speeches you and I have given literally all over the country and all over in other parts of the world. It's unbelievable when you think about it, isn't it?
I wish that we could talk to and let her know, Bruce. You and I discussed this before. The two guys that she saw potential in, we didn't see any potential or any interest. We both ended up doing a lot of public speaking.
Yeah.
I just recently gave a TED talk.
Yep.
At Georgia College, and
I was there.
Yeah, you were there. But you know what? I'm not sure I ever got over being a little nervous in front of an audience. I think I still do.
The reality is, I used to think it would be an impossibility to me to be a public speaker and to do what I did, watch you do what you did. You never underestimate the power of the possible. And so anything is possible. Usually it could be the thing you most dread may be the thing that takes you farther in life than anything you ever thought. There's a great lesson in our story of taking this speech class and ended up doing what we do, and I know that.
I agree with you completely because, Bruce, I'll say this. You're one of the best speakers I have ever heard. I think you have a God-given talent to communicate with people, whether it's one-on-one or in a small group of guys telling a funny story or speaking to a large audience. I've heard you do it all. And you have this unique skill of taking a message and having people laughing, bending over laughing so much at the stories you tell and the humor that you share, to ending that speech where everyone, you could hear a pin drop and people have got tears in their eyes from the sentiment and the sincerity and the importance of life that you share in your talks. So I think there was a lot of, and maybe I had some natural ability as well, as I ended up giving speeches in front of business audiences or a lecture at universities in different countries or the TED Talk or whatever the case may be. I guess I've got some of the same, or we got some of the same from each other in the environment we grew up in, speech class with Miss Harrelson. Maybe it's a combination of all those things. Yeah. I don't know. But the funny part of the story, or the interesting part of the story, maybe it's not funny. The interesting part of the story is you and I ended up doing a lot of speaking in our careers. And it was the thing we dreaded most when we went to school in Fort Valley.
Well, that is an unbelievable story. And we were absolutely, that would be the least thing. If you had to give me a list of things that you're going to do in life, that you want to do in life, that would have been at the very bottom of the list. And I think it would have been for you. You don't know.
No, I had one more that was right below that, Bruce, than mine, and that was being an undertaker.
Yeah, I hear you.
This was right above the last one for me. Right, this was right above being an undertaker.
Jimmy, but growing up in high school, we also had some funny things that happened. And there's no way we're going to have a time to tell the stories. But
while you're talking about Miss Harrelson, let me tell you a story that you've heard, that you remember. So we talked about playing hooky from school. Each year during the Masters, your daddy would take us to the Masters golf tournament in Augusta.
Yep.
When we started when we were in junior high school, but through high school.
Yep.
The school that was not an excusable absence at school.
Oh, sure.
And so this is the one time our parents would tell a fib for us. They would write us an excuse Bruce or excuse Jimmy for being missing, for being out of school yesterday. He was at home ill. So I'll never forget. We had been to the Masters maybe on a Thursday. I think that's the day your daddy often took us. And on Friday, I had to turn in the excuse. And I think we had to take them to each class and get them signed or something. Or we got one from the central office and the principal's office, and then took it around each class for them to mark us excused. I'll never forget the day I walked in with that note and handed it to Miss Harrelson. And she looked at me and smiled and winked and said, "Jimmy, I hope you enjoyed the Masters yesterday." And then mumbled over something like, "I wish I could have gone."
That's funny.
I'll never forget that.
That's a whole nother conversation going to the Masters, but we had a ball. We got old enough to drive. We had 6 tickets, so it'd be 6 of us. We'd take the funeral car over there or whatever and fill it up with folks. It's amazing we got back alive going over there.
I do remember going to that. And I also remember going in your mother's car. Your mother had an Oldsmobile Vista Cruiser station wagon.
Yep.
It had glass panels in the top where you could see out. I guess that's where the name Vista Cruiser comes from.
Right.
We would drive over there in that car, and you and I would usually be in the back of it. But the place I remember traveling the most in that car is to camp in the summer Deptworth by the sea.
Yep.
Your mother carried us back. If she'd take us down there, I think it'd start on a Sunday afternoon usually, and she'd pick us up maybe on a Friday afternoon. We'd spend the week down there, but we'd always go in her station wagon.
We were supposed to be getting a religious education, but we were mainly meeting girls down there, right?
Exactly. That's exactly what.
Some of those girls, I still remember their names, but that's where we were having a ball down there now.
That's why they never had to talk us into going.
We were ready, wasn't we? Because we'd always meet some new ones every time, too.
Yeah, that's right. When it's time to go, we say, sign us up. We're ready to go.
Yeah. So the other thing that we did, and I got one memory I'll never forget. We were typical teenagers, but we were spending the night at your house one night, and we decided we were going to sneak out. And we put some clothes or something up under the sheet, so if your mama came in the room, she could see us sleeping in the two beds in there. And we snuck out. We were going to try to go over and get Marcia. I don't know if one of her friends was with her or not, but we were going to try to get them to sneak out. And we go up there and we get up to the window and we start trying to knock on a window or something. We had no way we called her to tell her we were coming. I mean, we were idiots.
Oh, no.
We were idiots. All of a sudden, every light on the outside of that house turned on and we took off running. And I ran in one of those guy wires that hit me across the neck and flipped me about 3 times. And I can't. You remember that night?
I do remember. Yeah, we were walking everywhere we went. Yeah, we walked. We put the stuff under the sheets in the bed in case Mama got up, and we walked over there and quietly, and we're tapping on the window, and all of a sudden the floodlights came on. It was like an escape from a prison, and all the lights coming on in that house. It scared us to death.
It knocked my breath out of me. I mean, I hit that thing running wide open. It's one that it cut my neck off. That was unbelievable. The other thing, Jimmy, is we got more stories. We could go on and on with this, as you know, but I'll never forget going to the Key Club convention, and that was another thing. The truth is we didn't go to many Key Club meetings when we got to the convention. That was a fun time. We'd gotten a little older now, and we were out there trying to have fun and hanging out with people and meeting people. We had this one teacher, and I don't remember his name. It's not important in Fort Valley, but he's supposed to be our chaperone, and he took us, all these boys, to the nudie bar up there at night in Atlanta.
He was the, what do we call it? Not the counselor for the Key Club, but whatever the
sponsor.
The teacher role was. Sponsors, yeah. And so there was this convention coming up, and we never had been to that, but I think we were officers in the Key Club then.
We were.
So we were eligible to go. And he was going to take us, and we were going to stay in a hotel up there. And
I think I was the president of the Key Club.
You could have been. If you were president, I was probably vice president.
Or vice versa, yeah.
The way it worked with us. I think you were the president. So we got him up there, and we didn't want to go to the convention. I think we showed up and registered or something. I don't know if he talked us into it or we talked into him.
I think when I look back on it, we didn't have enough sense to know. I think he was a pervert, if you want the truth.
Well, again, I'm your straight man. Those are your words, not mine. So, we also talked him into taking us to a movie. A movie had just come out that we'd seen.
I remember the name of the movie. A
Clockwork Orange.
And it was rated R.
That's right.
Yeah.
And we thought that if we can get in there, that'd be some big stuff to do.
Yeah.
And so he took us to that, and I don't know which came first, but we went to one, and then we went to the nude bar.
And I don't think our parents ever knew any of it. Nobody at school ever knew. We never told on him. And
I think we just told the world, Bruce.
Jimmy, the other thing that I remember, and I'm going to change gears here a minute, that when we graduated from high school and we were getting ready to go to college, right. you and I went together. We took the SAT test twice.
Right. We took it our junior year and again our senior year.
Yeah. And so what was so crazy to me when I look back, we obviously took it together. We got our grades together. We got our test results and immediately called each other to see what we made. I don't know if people do that now or not, but we certainly didn't care. We were seeing how we did. And I don't know which way it was. I think, I don't know if you made 30 points higher than me the first time or 30 points higher than me the second time.
Here's what I remember, Bruce, and I'm pretty sure I got the number right. It was a 50 points difference. The first year, you made 50 points higher than I did. The second year, you made exactly the same score, and I made 50 points higher than you did. After 2 years, we had exactly the same average. 50 points difference one year versus the next.
And what was interesting to me about that, two things. One, we had done everything together. We hung out together. We learned how to date girls together. We grew up together. We spent all this time together, played ball together. Whatever we did together. Went to school together, took classes together. And I guess we learned the same things. We made the same thing on the test. But what?
I guess so, yeah.
I take pride in talking about that, and I do, because of this. What you ended up doing It includes advanced degrees from Harvard and Duke and Cambridge and HEC Paris. But the fact that I essentially made the same thing on the SAT that he did has always been a source of pride for me because of what you've accomplished academically. I mean, that is true. I mean, I'm serious about that. What you went on to do, you took your education, you gave I can promise you're the only person from Reynolds, Georgia that ever gave a commencement address at Duke University. I can promise you that. And you currently serve on the board of directors of Duke Medical School. But the reason I want to have him on here because I want to tell you, I knew him. We were just regular old guys growing up, and we were having fun in this little town and get in trouble and carry on, but we were being taught principles. We never got out of line. We didn't do stupid stuff that people do today. There was never 1 second that we thought we were going to be arrested for something. We treated girls or whatever with respect. We were taught stuff in this little town that became way more important than what we accomplished in life.
I agree completely, Bruce. To me, that was more important than anything else we ever did.
You mentioned your daddy moved to Sandersville and he opened his own dealership. Was that in 64?
1964, Daddy moved to Sandersville and opened Chevrolet dealership here.
He's been in business, in the car business, for 60 years, for himself for 60 years, right? Is that right?
That's right. Daddy's been in the car business, let me get my math right, since 1952, so that makes it 72 years.
Very successful, Sandersville, Milledgeville, but then he also, this Childre is the name, Childre. You see those emblems all over cars, but he had some siblings that also got in the car business, and I have a feeling, I think I know, that he kind of instigated all that. They followed his footsteps in doing that. So talk a little bit about how that came about, Jimmy.
So Uncle Rudolph was working for Monsanto or somebody in the fertilizer business after he graduated from the University of Georgia and was teaching agriculture for a while, and then he worked for this company. So Daddy suggested to Uncle Rudolph to consider coming down. They had moved to Ohio to come back to Georgia, and Daddy found the dealership in Canton for sale, and he went up there and bought it. And Uncle Rudolph went to work there and had agreement for him to buy Daddy out over time. And that's exactly what he did. And then Uncle Rudolph had that dealership and opened a Chrysler store later. And his son, Rudy Jr., joined him.
He opened what kind of store later?
A Chrysler.
A Chrysler store, yeah, okay.
So then Uncle Taylor was a pharmacist that owned a drugstore in Sylvester. And the Chevrolet dealership there came up for sale, and Uncle Taylor bought into that, and I think Uncle Rudolph helped advise him, and so did Daddy, of course. And Uncle Taylor became a dealer, and then he bought another dealership down in Dawson where his son Morris had it. So Uncle Rudolph had two, Uncle Taylor had two. Up in Central Georgia, we had the Chevrolet place here first, and then I opened Ford next, and then Daddy went to Millersville and opened a Chrysler store. And Bob ran the Chevrolet place, and then we opened Nissan in Millersville. And then later we moved Chevrolet when GM went bankrupt. We bought the store in Millersville and moved Chevrolet over there and combined the two territories into one and built a new store there. But in the meantime, Daddy bought the store in Fitzgerald and put his friend that he grew up with, Thomas Poole, in that store as a minority partner for Thomas to buy him out. His daddy was instrumental in helping Dr. Watley get that Chevrolet dealership over in Edgefield. I don't know that Daddy ever had any money in that one, but he helped him get the franchise and things. So, and then later in the 80s, after Uncle Rudolph sold those stores and retired, we bought 3 stores in Thompson, General Motors and Ford and Chrysler. So when I counted them up one time, I'm not counting Fitzgerald or Edgefield, just our family that used our logo. I think there were 12 stores total. And they all had the same Childre logo that Daddy sketched on a piece of paper, those rectangular letters that go across of every car. But the truth is, Daddy became an auto dealer extraordinaire. The best I've ever known.
So that all started with him selling cars for his father-in-law before he went in business for himself. That is absolutely amazing. Yeah, what a story.
Then he helped all of us, and all of his sons went in the business, and Uncle Taylor's and Uncle Rudolph's sons went in the business. he thought it was a good idea for his sons to compete with each other and him.
Amazing.
But he still was very, very focused on us being successful and doing a good job. It was all about doing a good job, and that brings the success. He never focused on the success. He focused on doing a good job. And if you accomplish that, then that will bring success. That's the way he puts it.
And he's 94, still goes to work every day of his life, literally still selling cars. Customers come in and ask for him, right?
So I went over there yesterday to have lunch with Daddy. When I got there, he had customers in his office. They had just closed the deal, and he couldn't go to lunch with me because he had to make sure everything got signed up correctly.
At 94.
At 94.
Unbelievable.
So I missed lunch with my dad because he was too busy to go to lunch with me because he was selling cars.
Unbelievable. Well, I tell you what we're going to do. We're going to bring in Jimmy Childre Sr. himself, or Big Jimmy as he's known to many, on the final part of this 4-part series, and let him talk about his life, his business, and what makes him tick, even at almost 94 years of age. So tune in to the next Friends for Life episode on the View from a Hearse podcast.
Viewing life from a hearse, it could be worse. Laugh, think, and cry with the country undertaker.